This is Drew Spence from the Dynamic Universe. This week we're talking about page layout and conquering some issues with word balloons. We're using the Demon Division comic series that I covered before. This is it on the hosting site Smack Jeeves. But we could take a look at the page in question. The initial challenge was to use the arrows or not for the word balloons. And this is one of those interesting things where, as a comic creator myself, I felt when I first jumped into CGI that I would probably be breaking many of the conventions for comics. And one of them I thought about breaking was removing the little tails on the end of the word balloons, figuring that you would know who was speaking by the context and also the placement of the word balloon. And I found that for me it made a lot of sense because I'm studying the page for hours at a time as I build each page, but a reader is, once again, as we talked about last time, just glancing through your book. And it's a lot to ask a reader to get to the end of an entire sentence and then after that figure out who to ascribe it to. So in this particular case, we have a scene that opened up. This you're going to see the finished version of this one, which is way different in layout. But for just a challenge in page layout, we'll take a look at it in its early stage. So we have the three characters in an interrogation room. They're having a conversation. The one agent speaks first. Then it goes to the main subject speaks. This line doesn't have the tail on it, so we're not sure who exactly is speaking this line. But from just context and the flow of the text, we could pretty much tell it's not this character speaking this. It either belongs to this character or it belongs to this character, right? Then we have another word balloon that's here that we're not sure if it belongs from this frame or does it belong in this one. So we're not sure, again, who's actually saying this. We could assume here, it could be here, but we're not really sure. But in context, it seems like the "but then" is being said by this character. Is it an interruption of this, or, you're not sure. So in the very beginning, when you're creating the book, you're staring at it, this set of dialogue is extremely memorized. And you have it in your head, you know the flow of the conversation because you've been reading the previous page and this one. Obviously in movies, there's usually, you can use a silhouette of a character. And even if you can't see who's speaking, you're going to recognize the voice so you know who's speaking. So you don't have to keep the character that's talking always in the frame. In comics, we sometimes break that rule. Someone's speaking through a door, or we put that quote in the narrator's box, so you know that it's an after said conversation, like the camera has shifted to the new scene, but the character is still speaking from the last place that everyone was, so you understand it's a late delivery of a line. In this particular case, we just get a little bit of confusion of who is talking. So some of the basic rules are, usually the character speaking goes on to the left. So if this character was speaking first, most likely his word balloon would end up over here. To start off, on the upper left, speaker would be here, then this line goes here, then possibly if this is the third thing that's being said, the question becomes, where do we place this third thing? Or we start to move the characters around where this now is going to be the first speaker and you switch who's talking to make sure this goes here as first, then how do I fit this second phrase here? So it becomes a little bit of a juggling act when we sort of have a scene and we're trying to match the dialogue to the scene. What usually happens when we're laying out our comic is that the script comes first. So if I have my script and I know the order of who's speaking, I'll lay out the scene so that the characters are sort of talking. We're going to go super deep in this. It's not ultra serious because obviously the author has figured this all out and has worked this out. But we're just basically talking about a general challenge when it comes to making your books and how to do the layout and the word balloons versus the art. So when we kind of match the two together, the script tells me who's speaking first. And if this character is going to speak first, I usually want him on the left of the frame. And it might mean that I do some drastic changes. If this was a huge establishing shot and I pull the camera back, I might give you that establishing shot so you can see the entire room first. And it might say, interrogation room 12XB. And once I've shown you the entire room and all the characters in the room, you've got your spatial reference. So from then, I can just put the camera anywhere I need it to be to tell my story and have the dialogue flow and match the imagery can merge one-on-one. So if this was a beautiful shot, like I want to show them all together and I have to put them all arranged, you can see the cool things on the table, which is very cool. The flattened gloves, I'm not even sure how they did that. You know, we have enough stuff here to show that, you know, the room is somewhat populated. There's a bunch of other things. We'll come back to this later. But initially, I'd have my script, and I've got to match the imagery to the script. So what I did was I approximated this scene in the Daz Store using a bunch of assets, and I'm basically recreating the concept of the two figures sitting on one side of the table and a subject on the other and a guard in the room somewhere. And what we usually do is choose the camera placement dependent upon who's speaking. So I might have swung the camera this way, and again, the walls are removable, so if I have to bump into a wall, in this particular case, wall number 4 has been removed so I could get the camera where I need it, I might switch the actual scene so that the character is speaking in the order that I need them in. And I could also back off, let's see which wall is blocking my vision. When I back up too far, one of these walls is a problem for my camera. So we're gonna find out which wall that is. Okay, so it's wall 1 is the wall that's in my way and blocking my camera. All right, so we've got my scene, and when I go to get my my render together, I might choose now to arrange the scene this way at first, so that this character speaks first, his balloon goes here. If this character speaks second, maybe I drop it here, and maybe his arrives late, or just play with the order. If I want to get them even closer, I can sort of shift it around. So let's go back to the page itself. Agent speaks first. This is the second. This could belong to this agent, or it could be a continued thought. Again, it might not matter which one speaks first out of these two if they both hold similar weight in the story. So I might just place it, speaks first, you know, maybe a reply, speaks third. So when we're laying that out, I go back to this, speaks first, there's the reply, speaks third. So if you're not quite sure what the layout would be, I can switch to a render, and we're gonna pick a 16:9 sort of render shape, and now I've got a shape that I can pull in. And for the sake of laying it out, I might know that this is the shape I'm gonna go with. And you can see by choosing this shape, I can now decide, okay, I'm gonna put my word balloons in certain places. And again, this is all free form. I could shrink the table down if I wanted a more intimate space. I could shrink the table. There we go. And I could shrink the table to be even a tighter dimension if I want to move these characters into a tighter space. I noticed on the actual table, it's a little bit more intimate table. I didn't have the interrogation set, so this is like, I believe, a teacher's room or something that this came from. So I could have shrunk the table down to tighten it up, but you get the idea that I'm going to match the frame that I've sort of chosen to render from based on where I plan to place my text. And I also will usually render at a much larger size than I need for the entire frame. So I'll probably back the camera out to some far distance so that when I actually render, I can shift it around and decide how much room I need. You know, do I want to place it directly here? Do I need a little bit more room to the far left? Can I cut right at this edge here and place it there? So I'll sort of shift it around to make sure I have the kind of room. And in this case, you can see the same sort of idea that if I wanted more room, this actually fits on this side, this could fit somewhere else, and we can sort of just play with the general space of the scene. Some of these page layouts are for traditional comic, I will say that, and some are for mobile and some are for vertical scrolling. So there's several versions of these pages. So like all of this black space and the way some of it is laid out is based on scrolling or traditional comic panels, or even mobile where you'll see a very small frame in an actual single panel. So the author is actually accommodating all the different interfaces, for now at least, so you're gonna get some, some crossover, some conventions being bent to accommodate the mobile platform and other ways that you're looking at comics in the modern age. So with that said, we're back to the discussion of it. Now that I've shown you a little bit about it, we go to their choice of actually adding tails. So we have a connector that shows that indeed it was this character speaking both lines. And we have, now we get to see, again, who spoke this line. It was also this same agent. So now that changes our perspective of the scene, because now it brings up other questions. Like now we're back to creative idea, because again, all this is optional and subjective, but now we're back to the question of, okay, so if this is the first, maybe this now belongs to this character, this can go here. If this belongs here, maybe these two merge together. And this is said, and this, the but then fits down here, and this now entire word balloon belongs to this character. So now it becomes an interesting question of, you know, the choices you're making. Now that we know the actual, you know, we've pulled it off, we sort of get to see who's speaking. We cut down to the actual third version of it, which I believe is the final, where we've sort of sorted out what goes here is another character speaking. We have some, this book is magic-based, if you remember, so we have some special effects happening here. There's a bunch of mind reading. Sometimes it could be a time lapse. I've lost the context of this actual page. I believe this one is more recent than the last place I was in the book, so I'm not 1,000% sure of the context, but I do believe this is a recap, and that's why the art design keeps changing as we're sliding back and forth through memories, as we're going through the interrogations, like a flashback, a sort of magic-enhanced flashback, I do believe. So we get the page layout makes a little bit more sense in context, because we have... this space is now eaten by another. And another thing we should discuss now while we're here is comic legend John Byrne, when was critiquing one of my comics, said that the word balloons need to lead the reader's eyes across the page. And I knew what that meant, but we're going to take a look at that in this case, because this is pretty much an expert usage of that technique. So we're just going to grab something that we can use as a marker, maybe the color yellow for today. We'll pick yellow, and we're sort of looking at the trail your eyes follow as you read this comic. So it starts upper left as a Western comic. We begin to read left to right, and here's where my eye first starts on this panel. So I read here, and my eye starts to drive across the page. And we're looking at the direction that my eye goes, which is being led by the word balloons. It zigs down across and zigs back across, zigs down, and generally right back out. And this is the normal flow of a comic that is leading my eye through the frames. If that seems a little strange at the moment, look at this panel where we didn't have anything in this area. There was nothing leading us in this area. We started from here, went to here, and although these two connect in the next panel, my eye goes to here first, jumps back to here, and then cuts down. Not the worst crime in the world, but would have been easier when we went to that second version, which had the connecting dots and connecting bridges to all the different balloons. And it kind of made more sense which way my eye should flow, besides, you know, the little bit of a disconnect between this one major thing. But again, it's about, you know, your choices and your layout and where you're going to go with your book. You know, obviously you're free to do as you please with your own series, but you want to make it as easy on the reader as possible. And make it something that everyone can easily follow. There's subtle rules to a lot of this stuff. If you went back to the original panel, there was, you know, small little graphic things like, you know, would we remove this foot from here? I have a personal thing about characters being cut off by word balloons, and I don't like word balloons overlaying. Like this is you know, again, to each their own. I just never really liked the idea of a word balloon sitting on top of a character. So in this particular case, the question would have been, well, what would you have done in this particular sense? Is that I probably would have cheated and move this character over to this side, or just phased him out for this one shot so that he's not here. Or just like I said, shifted this character over to this side so that he's not eating up this particular space. Some things can be done with a tilt of the camera. If this camera tilts over anymore, he sort of falls and becomes a backdrop, and you no longer remember that this is a character. It would just become a tan stripe back here if the camera was slightly tilted more to the side. So back into this one, we have our officer in the back. If we tilt it a little bit more, I am basically removing that character from the scene, because here is what would have been the cutoff point near the top, and we could have gotten rid of that, or in some cases just tilted it over more so that the cop is there and not so much removed, and you would have had the balloon sitting here where we could still see the cop as as a watching security guard, so to speak, in the scene, and we'd have had plenty of room for everyone to be having their discussions and their talk. So a lot of times, I'll have the script on one side and just match it to what I'm creating. So other than that, I think we covered basically the page layout rules. It was solved by the artist in a clever way. The actual final page layout follows many of the conventions. It's easy to tell who was speaking and the order. They actually, I would call this basically a perfect example of how to lay out your pages. Of course, there's creative liberties with the special effects, but this is a book based on magic. There's a little bit of effect use, which changes the tone. In this particular shot, looks almost crayon compared to these that are more of a graphic, sort of almost penciled look. But, we're jumping. So, again, outside of the context of the book, it's just a very nice page that lays out well. And again, we got the extra frame for the but then, which was disjointed, and also gives the author a chance to give another expression to the character. That this face that you didn't see for all this talking, now you get an expressive shot to sort of match up the tone of what's happening. But this is Demon Division, a comic you can read for free. The links will be inside the description. Support your indie comics. Get a load of the series. And this is Drew Spence from the Dynamic Universe. We'll talk more about comics and Postwork and everything else. And I will see you guys.